Most people think confidence is destroyed by failure. They assume that confidence disappears after rejection, criticism, embarrassment, or a major mistake. But what if the real threat to confidence is something far less obvious? What if the habit that slowly drains your self-belief isn't a dramatic event at all, but a quiet behavior repeated every day, often without your awareness? The strange thing about confidence is that it rarely disappears overnight. More often, it erodes gradually. A small doubt here, a moment of hesitation there, and over time, something begins to change. You start second-guessing decisions that once felt simple. You become more cautious when expressing opinions. You hesitate before taking opportunities. Eventually, you may find yourself wondering where your confidence went, as if it simply vanished. But confidence rarely vanishes. It is usually traded away.
Think about your own life for a moment. Have you ever talked yourself out of something before even trying? Have you ever assumed you would fail before you had evidence? Have you ever compared yourself to someone else and instantly felt smaller? If so, you may have encountered one of the most damaging habits in human psychology: habitual self-evaluation through comparison. At first glance, comparison seems harmless. In fact, it can even feel useful. We compare ourselves to understand where we stand in the world. Psychologists call this social comparison theory, first proposed by Leon Festinger. According to this framework, people naturally evaluate themselves by comparing their abilities, achievements, and characteristics with others. The problem begins when comparison stops being occasional and becomes automatic. Imagine someone scrolling through social media every day. They see successful entrepreneurs, attractive influencers, highly productive professionals, and people seemingly living perfect lives. Each individual comparison feels insignificant, yet over weeks, months, and years, the brain starts collecting evidence. Not evidence about reality, but evidence supporting a particular narrative. Everyone else is ahead. The dangerous part is that these comparisons are almost always incomplete. People compare their private struggles to someone else's public highlights. They compare their beginning to someone else's middle. They compare uncertainty within themselves to confidence displayed by others.
Over time, this creates what psychologists call a negative self-schema. A schema is essentially a mental framework through which we interpret information. Once a person develops a belief that they are inadequate, their mind starts filtering experiences through that belief. Successes become luck. Compliments are dismissed. Achievements feel temporary. Failures, however, become proof. This is where confidence begins to drain, not because the person lacks ability, but because their interpretation of reality becomes distorted. Yet comparison is only one side of the story. Beneath it often lies another habit: chronic self-monitoring. Some individuals constantly evaluate how they appear to others. They monitor their words, facial expressions, decisions, and behavior almost continuously. Instead of fully engaging in experiences, they observe themselves having those experiences. Imagine speaking during a meeting. One person focuses on the conversation itself. Another focuses on how they sound, whether people approve, whether they appear intelligent, and whether they might say something wrong. The second person is not simply participating, they are performing.
Research in social anxiety and self-consciousness suggests that excessive self-monitoring increases insecurity because attention becomes divided. Instead of directing energy toward action, the mind directs energy toward evaluation. Ironically, the more someone tries to avoid mistakes, the more anxious and uncertain they become. Confidence, contrary to popular belief, is not built through perfect performance. It is built through repeated engagement despite imperfection.
Why? Because confidence is not created by certainty. It is created by evidence. When people repeatedly face challenges, they gather evidence that they can cope. When they repeatedly avoid challenges, they gather evidence that they need protection. This distinction is crucial. Confidence is not a personality trait that some people are born with and others lack. It is often the result of accumulated experiences teaching the brain that uncertainty can be handled. Perhaps the most overlooked truth about confidence is that it is less about how highly you think of yourself and more about how much you trust yourself. Self-esteem asks, How valuable am I? Confidence asks, can I handle what happens next? And trust is built through action. When people constantly compare themselves, excessively monitor themselves, or habitually avoid discomfort, they unintentionally send a message to their own minds. The message is simple. I am not enough. I am not ready. I cannot cope. Over time, the brain begins to believe that message. But the reverse is equally true. Every time you take action despite uncertainty, speak despite nervousness, or move forward without guarantees, you send a different message. A message that gradually reshapes identity itself. The hidden habit that drains confidence is not failure. It is the constant practice of treating yourself as someone who cannot handle life. And perhaps confidence returns the moment you stop asking whether you are good enough and start proving to yourself that you are capable of facing whatever comes next.
If this insight resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on which of these habits appears most often in your own life. Sometimes confidence doesn't need to be built from scratch. Sometimes it simply needs the habits draining it to be recognized. Sources and references: Leon Festinger, Social Comparison Theory, 1954. Albert Bandura, Self-Efficacy, the Exercise of Control. Aaron T. Beck, Cognitive Therapy and the Emotional Disorders. American Psychological Association, APA, Self-Esteem and Self-Efficacy Resources. Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow. David A. Clark and Aaron T. Beck, The Anxiety and Worry Workbook. Brené Brown, Daring Greatly.